Thank you for being here tonight for this exceptional session, because the women and men who will animate this session are exceptional. That's a good one. That's a good one. We'll give them a round of applause. Jean-Hervé at his best. Now, on a more serious note, we started, as I said, 2 days ago, taking, the challenge, to face up the challenge following the dissolution of the parliament. It caused total chaos in French society. Well, and I want to thank all my colleagues, but I want to do it, I'll do it again. So we decided to change the program, and we decided mainly to try to understand what had happened, why 2/3 of French citizens, voters, why are they angry? And we got to the conclusion that will play. We came to the conclusion that the reason for this anger is a form of populism. French populism is the idea that for years and years, decades, a large number of problems have not been solved. And I'm referring to problems for youth, for the youth, for purchasing power, education. All this had been pushed back, strangely enough, to establish a link with our tradition as economists. Throughout the years, we were protected by the fact that there was no clear sanction to the fact that we would not solve problems. So the long-term interest rates remained very low, and the gap between the interest rate, which is the reference in the German and the French, was between 30 and 50. So it was very limited. So we felt everything was going on smoothly. Our conviction is that we face the end of a cycle, the pivotal point of a very complicated period for our country, and the role of the Rencontres d'Aix is not to come up with political proposals for tomorrow and Monday, Tuesday, whatever, but to try to think about the problems, which unsolved problems, and in fact, we had to open new leads and tracks on these topics. We did that. Everybody worked on that. All the sessions have worked on that. And I have to say, my friends, what time is it? At 7:10 we can say that the challenge, we made it, we did it. Congratulations to all of you. The final session, that was just to reframe this final session. There will be 5 speakers, one in visual conference in Ukraine, one British politicians, American economist, leading lady, former Minister of Foreign Affairs in Rwanda, and a very talented young French women. I've asked them, as I did for the introduction, I'll give them one word, and on that word they can tell us how they see the future, how they can link up the world, how can we link up the worlds. It will be a very open session. There might be a couple of sessions. Just after that, I will ask our President, Françoise Benamou, to join us on stage, because there will be a text, a document that we wish to read, that and then I will ask Renaud Muselier if he's still around. I hope. Well, if he's not here, well, he's not there. Fair enough. Well, to join us, and otherwise, and rapidly, I will do a report, the written report that you will more synthetic of not of the conclusions, but the synthesis of what was said in the last 2 days, with 400 participants from 45 countries, from all nationalities, all origins, and so on and so forth. All this to say that this report clearly has a value that we've never given to any of our final conclusions before, because they were conclusions of the Cercle, but very seldom conclusions of the 400 or 500, 600 people who have taken the floor here. Then, of course, we will keep our hands very warm and to help and applaud all those who helped. Thank you. So, yeah, you got a time limit, 10 minutes, and you got a boy over there, young man over there, who will wave the stop sign. Okay? Do you see him? Okay. And you have to stop, otherwise you'll get an electric shock. Okay? You're gonna, yeah. So all this to say that we got about an hour ahead of us. We'll finish with fireworks, and then it will be a great party. But thanks already to all those who are here and who worked very hard for the last 2 days, and us for 3 weeks, because, you know, to reshuffle the program, we had to do it, you know, and it was not fun. I'm calling Oleksandra MUSHIKIWABO, sorry, on the word peace. She's in Kiev, and she will talk for 10 minutes about peace. Can you hear me? You have the floor, madam.
Thank you very much for providing me a floor. It's a huge honor for me to address to this distinguished audience. I'm a human rights lawyer, and I have been documenting war crimes in this war which Russia started against Ukraine. And to be honest, I and my colleagues, we are documenting something much more than just violations of Geneva and Hague Conventions. We are documenting human pain. Because war is probably the most horrible thing which can just happen in a human life. And that's why in my speech, I want to concentrate on a peace. And I would like to share with you 3 points. First, we have to define the word peace properly. For example, people in Ukraine want peace much more than anyone else. But peace doesn't come when country which was invaded stop fighting. That's not peace. That's occupation. And occupation is just another forms of the war. I know what I'm talking about because I have been documenting war crimes for 10 years in the occupied territories. And I know that people there live in gray zone. They have no tools how to defend their rights, their freedom, their property, their children, their lives, and their beloved ones. Occupation is not just changing one state flag to another. Occupation means torture, rape, enforced disappearances, denial of your identity, forcible adoption of your own children, filtration camps, and mass graves. And that's not peace, because peace means a possibility to have a freedom to live without fear of violence and have a long-term perspective. Second, justice is precondition to peace. All this hell which we now face in Ukraine is a result of total impunity which Russia enjoyed for decades. Russia committed horrible crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Libya, in Syria, in other countries of the world. Russia have never been punished. Russia believe they can do whatever they want. I personally interviewed hundreds of people who survived Russian captivity. They told me how they were beaten, raped, smashed into wooden boxes, their fingers were cut, their nails were torn away, their nails were drilled, they were electrically shocked through their genitalia. There is no military necessity in doing this. There is also no legitimate reason. Russians have done these horrible things because they could. Because this impunity have a long-lasting tradition. When Nazi war criminals were tried in Nuremberg trials, the Soviet Gulag have never condemned or punished. And that is why, when the whole world commemorates the end of the Second World War with the slogan, "Never again," Russia, for decades, commemorates this day with a slogan, "We can repeat." And third, peace and human rights are inextricably linked. And the problem is not just in that fact that in authoritarian countries, the space of freedom is shrinking to the size of the prison cell. The problem is that even in well-developed democracies, there are political forces who start to put into question the Universal Declaration of Human Rights gain weight. Because current generation in these well-developed democracies, they inherited the system from their parents. They have never fought for them. They start to perceive human rights and freedom for granted. They became consumers of values. They start to see freedom like a possibility to make a choice between different types of cheeses in supermarket. And that's why they start to change their freedoms for populist claims, for economic benefits, for illusion of security, and for their own comfort. But the truth is that freedom is very fragile, and human rights can't be attained once and forever. We every day make our own choice. And the truth is that countries which massively violate human rights, such countries provided as threats not just for their own citizens, but for the entire world. And Russia is a clear example, because for decades, Russia persecuted Russian civil society, jailed activists, killed journalists, and dispersed peaceful demonstrations. But for decades, the civilized world closed their eyes to this fact. So I would like to conclude that if we want peace tomorrow, we have to take responsibility today. And we have to base political decisions not just on economical benefits or security issues or geopolitical interests or political careers, but on values of human rights and freedoms. Because even when people will benefit in short term, for all of us, it will be a catastrophe in a long-term perspective. Human rights and freedoms are important, and we have to defend our values. And this is a way to achieve a just, a sustainable peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you can see that we've crossed the first step. First step is human rights in a future society that we want to see improved. We want to fight balances that we are losing. And what the speaker said is very touching. So it will be the Peter Mandelson speech time. A couple of words about Peter Mandelson. Peter Mandelson is an amazing man, amazing. He is well-known in France for many reasons, but mainly because at one stage he was European Commissioner and he was a trade, if my memory is not failing. And he was at a time when the European relationship were a bit tricky. And Peter was one of the most intelligent men at the time, not therefore the most dangerous one. You know, I remember of a discussion in Peter Mandelson will take the floor. Oh, careful, you know. And then he played a major role, which for us is a source of reflection tonight, major role, together with Tony Blair, with Gordon Brown, And we'll add, well, I have to with Anthony Giddens, some of you might have known, well, he prefaced the book I wrote, you know, the English version. Anyway, he said it was a good book, by the way, so, you know, whatever. So, they invented, transformed what was, in our opinion, the analysis of the British political situation from the left to the left, to nationalized, and so on and so forth. They invented the neoliberal, and it was very deep. Some of you linked it up to
philosophe allemand.
We linked into a particular German philosopher, and we saw that we could change our way of seeing things and acting in politics in a major country. So this is what he's going to be talking to about, this major challenge that they managed to succeed in. And here we are, Saturday evening. We can see that it's important for us to see that we can transform things. That's something that's really important.
Much indeed. I did actually receive a phone call once, early one morning when I was Commissioner for Trade, from the French Prime Minister, who told me that I had fought like a lion for Europe. And for that, I was proud to receive the Légion d'honneur. So you see, we are friends. Now, given the ban on politicians speaking today, I'm very privileged to be speaking with you this evening, representing the entire political class. So I will do my best. But this is indeed an historic moment for both our countries, Britain and France. Britain is now coming together under a new centre-left majority government as of yesterday, and France, of course, is going in a different direction. But winning back power for us, progressives in Britain, has been very hard. When Labour lost office in 2010, the party's then leadership was inclined to renounce New Labour, casting doubt on our record in government and preferring to take a more ideological approach. In fact, it failed to renew Labour, instead managing to sound old-fashioned and irrelevant. And this void was then filled with a further form of left populism, laced with anti-Semitism under Jeremy Corbyn. Now, in this week's election, Labour came back, Lazarus-like, from our near-death experience. And we did so by placing ourselves very firmly in the policy centre ground. But have no illusions, Britain is not immune to the political forces that we are now seeing rising in France. And indeed, this is a European-wide phenomenon. A populist nationalist movement is growing on the right in the UK, and how we all respond to this will shape our politics for the next generation. So what are the underlying causes of this for us all? Well, in my view, they are both difficult and complex. Many disillusioned voters are attracted to those who they regard as strong politicians with confidently expressed opinions who appear to lead rather than simply bend or conform to conventional cosmopolitan wisdom. They appear radical, but of course they are better at deploying slogans than finding solutions. But on the left, we are most comfortable on economy-related issues. And Labour has just fought our election on economic cost of living issues, with the rising tax burden and deteriorating public services at the center of our case. But pressing as these economic and public service questions are, many disillusioned voters have other concerns. Many who work in the everyday economy feel their status is diminished and insufficiently rewarded. They fear rather than embrace technological change. They feel patriotic, but believe that their patriotism is looked down on. Their experience is that public services and social security aren't working well, partly because of population pressures, but also because of inadequate spending and efficient delivery. Now, some feel they are disrespected and that crime and antisocial behavior is making them less secure in their own communities. And these are all concerns which cannot be reduced simply to economics. They are, in fact, majority concerns, but institutionally and in many parts of the media, these voters feel that they are, like a powerless minority, ignored by a different culture from their own. Many on the left pursue politics as they see it, of inclusiveness, asserting the rights and the voice of minorities in society. This is very important for us to do. But all too often, the left fail to see that their inclusiveness is also selective. And it denies the right of those in the perceived majority to have legitimate grievances of their own, and this further compounds those grievances. Now, these voters are very indispensable to us, and we will not reconnect with them unless we understand and adequately address cultural anxieties and their sense of disempowerment. As politicians, we need to start listening to what these voters are saying to us and to respond. And migration is the most obvious example. The great Labour Europhile and reforming Home Secretary, Roy Jenkins, got close to where we need to be back in the 1960s, in my opinion. His three pillars in respect of migration were control, integration, and tackling discrimination. And I would add a fourth, which is proportionality. There are limits to what is sustainable, and we should start by acknowledging these limits. Unless we develop migration policies that command majority support, we will find ourselves out of power and more extreme groups and parties in power going much further and damaging our economies and our public services, as well as our societal cohesion. The tendency among some progressives, in my view, has been to run away from this debate for too long, out of some discomfort, and instead, rather than dedicate our energy to finding progressive solutions to this issue. And in my view, this has to change. The cohesion and the success of European society depends on all of us in the center ground of politics finding new ways to address these issues. Although the centre held at the recent European parliamentary elections, the divergence in outlook between the European elite and the European street widened uncomfortably. And we should not confuse the existence of a centrist majority in Europe with stability. These are not the same things. For stabilization to prevail, the center must not just regroup, but it must rethink and ask itself serious questions. We must be cultural as well as economic in our thinking and in our policy development. So this is now what I think Europe's leadership has to address. And I think we should do so, ladies and gentlemen, with the same vigor and the same confidence to match those in our societies and our politics who simply like to shout. Thank you.
Bon, nous voilà déjà rentrés dans le vif du sujet de l'optimisme, au fond.
Now, we're talking about optimism, and what matters is to understand what's at stake, as you said, and what you talked about, that is, migration, is a complicated topic, and very often people tend to push this away from them. Right, now we have a third speaker, that's Jason FURMAN, who's a professor and his PhD, and that's very important for us. Your PhD was in Harvard, and you are a professor at Harvard, and you were one of the economic advisors who were very much listened to by President Obama. And the word is trust for you. Why? Because I looked at what you do, and you think a lot about the reasons why today we tend to challenge all of the political institutions, the trade unions, all the institutions that exist. How can we regain trust? 10 minutes, please.
Should not have problem solving this in the next 10 minutes. We've all observed the rise of populism to the east in Hungary, to the north in Sweden with Brexit, to the south in Italy. We've had a little bit of it west of you in the United States. And it's tempting to think that this is all happening because whatever it is that we thought was the right thing to do wasn't done. And if you had only done that, it would all be fine. But what's notable is how different all these circumstances are. Eastern European economies were booming when populism rose. Our economy was coming out of a deep financial crisis, but also doing reasonably well. Italy growth had just started to pick up. Some countries like France have very large states with a substantial amount of redistribution. Other countries like the United States have much smaller states with very low levels of redistribution. And yet you've seen a lot of common things in all of these countries. The most fundamental and at the root of it has been just a dramatic increase in distrust of institutions. You mentioned Harvard a few times in my introduction. We have a decent brand name. We get tourists. People come and buy Harvard t-shirts. But if you say you should think this because I'm from Harvard, for at least half of the United States, they're more likely to think the opposite of whatever you said, rather than to believe what you said. In fact, trust in universities in the United States, and I think around the world, is incredibly polarized. And so among Republicans, it is less than 20%. Among Democrats, it's still reasonably high. Trust in the media, trust in the courts, trust in the Congress, trust in the presidency, all of these are very low, And many of these are polarized and depend very much on what party you are and what party is in power. Now, it's easy to look out at people who say climate change isn't real, who say that vaccines don't work, and have other ideas that are completely contradicted by science, and say, you know, they're ignorant, they don't know what they're talking about, they just need to listen to my colleagues from Harvard, and then they would know the truth. And there's something to that. I don't think you should let people off the hook who have views that are just completely, utterly contradicted by reality. But my colleagues, maybe sometimes myself, also have some of the blame when they take issues that are complicated and have trade-offs and pretend that they're simple and that there are no trade-offs, when they say that the entire world will come to an end in 5 years if we don't do anything about climate change, and then 5 years later, turns out the world is still there, when they make statements that overstate the benefits of vaccines in order to get people to take them, probably knowing that some of those statements aren't true. All of those are ways in which the elites, people at universities, people maybe even at gatherings like this, have done something to earn the mistrust. Now, I don't know the ratio of the blame. How much of the blame is the people who disbelieve climate change and disbelieve vaccines? Or how much of the blame is people that overstate the problem of climate change, which, by the way, I think is a very, very real problem, don't get me wrong, or overstate the benefits of vaccines? I'm not sure the ratio. But let's say the ratio, and I don't think this is true, let's say the ratio is 90% the fault of the people who don't believe the scientists and 10% the fault of the scientists for exaggerating. Well, guess what? The elites, the scientists, the people at universities, they can really only do something about that 10% of the problem that they caused. And it may be more than 10% of the problem. That's what they can do. You can sit around complaining all you want about people not listening to you, people not trusting you, people not trusting in institutions, and it's not going to change their mind. What has a hope and a prayer of changing minds is by changing your own behavior and changing the way you're doing things. So I would suggest 4 steps. The first is don't lie. That's relatively easy. Very few people think of themselves as lying, but yet I sometimes hear things that take something where there was a good argument for something and add to it to a point where it becomes untrue. The second is maybe a little bit harder, which is don't mislead. You know, when it comes to migration, for example, in the United States, in France, in Sweden, and just about every country I mentioned before, the share of people who are migrants is the largest it's been in some countries ever. In other countries like the United States, the largest since the year 1900. I think that's a good thing. I think that's contributed a lot to our economy in the United States. But it's a really big change, too. And to level with people, to respect that people think that that's a big change, to not try to deny that there has been any change, I think is a way to not be misleading. The third suggestion is don't just talk, but listen. In fact, there's a lot of social scientific evidence that the best way to persuade people is not to go on and on and on, though in my defense I was told to talk for 10 minutes, but is to listen and to try to understand that even when somebody is saying something wrong, there's a kernel of something right, a kernel of a real concern, a cry for help, a legitimate way in which they're worried about maybe their status, their place in the world, and the like. And so to listen. And the final thing is writing a shared story is not your story. It's not their story. It can only be a shared story. And my training is in economics. That's what I spend most of my time thinking about. And the core insight of economics is gain from trade, that the world is positive sum. That's something I very deeply believe in. If we wanted to be wonky about economic policies, I'd talk about the importance of expanding productivity growth, increasing the size of the pie, and ways in which that could help address our problems. I'd talk about distribution and how that pie is distributed. But I think most fundamentally, a shared story is one in which, by not lying, by not misleading, by not just talking, but but listening as well, come up with something that bridges gaps. I'm under no illusion as to how easy this is. I'm under no illusion as to how much this will change things overnight. But acknowledging that the world is complex, that the world has trade-offs, that you have very good arguments for your position, but there are some arguments against your position as well, that science doesn't actually ever give us answers, because we need to combine science with values, combine science with an understanding of what costs and benefits are. I think if we start to all slowly do that, step by step, person by person, we can start to make progress on the shared story that's the title of this session, and maybe get to a somewhat better politics than we've all had in our countries over the last decade and maybe longer. Thank you.
Merci, merci, Jason.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jason. Well, as you see, we are making headway. We have a vision which is more optimistic, and as you will see, we will finish with rosé wine. Now, Eva SADOUN, please, 10 minutes as well. This is a young woman, Eva SADOUN, very interesting woman. For a couple of years, now many years, she's launched a number of actions, and from what I gather, the objective is to invest, but to invest for well-being. So the word that I have for her, the word that she said I should use, is care. Care. A new way of thinking about growth. 10 minutes, that's going to be brilliant, I think. Thank you very much. I started as an entrepreneur, and then I looked at economic theories, the militants. I was working on the ecological and social transition on the employer side. I looked at economy, not political issues, not art, but what was important for me was the economy, because I have this conviction in me, which is growing every day, which is one of the main reasons why we have a fragmentation in our society, or social inequalities, ecological inequalities. This is coming from economy. If you look at what's happening in France today, we couldn't say that economy is not triggered what's happening now, but in a certain way, and that's what I started thinking about when I started studying economy, is that we can think about doing things collectively if we maximize the interest of each individual, the homo economicus, if without distrusting together, they should work together. This business model, this economic model is connected to the social crisis that we're talking about this week, but the ecological crisis is due to what man or human beings have done on nature. No, I'm saying man, not human beings, but man. And for a good reason. It's the IPCC report that says that. We have to rethink this. Now, in the light of all of these conclusions, there are two messages that we hear in the media. There's one that the general public is ridiculing, and which is that of degrowth, that people are mocking, or flows that have not been rethought, a niche-based model. The other voice or message is to keep the system the way it is. But then we should also face and overcome new crises and new options. But in doing that, we wouldn't even challenge or question the reasons why we have these social and ecological problems without challenging the models that have triggered these crises that we're experiencing today. Because the model of more green growth is really based on individuals and on polarization of individuals. There are two numbers that I like. Our GDP, and the GDP growth was 2% a year. But if you look at the Human Development Index, it has stagnated in the past 50 years. What's the reason? There are two main reasons. The two underlying assumptions in the business model that I'd like to challenge this evening is, number one, that we don't consider that we are people who care. I don't know if you know that, but newborns, when you feed them, the reason why they do this with their spoons is because they want you to feed them. So care is something that belongs to humankind. It's societies and economies that mislead us. The second thing I'd like to challenge is the separation of two spheres in our societies coming from the liberal models. One which is called productive. It's a sphere that would gather all the wealth, and the private sphere. That was Adam Smith's thesis, which is that of care, which should be free. And this is what we see in our models today, and the system, this sphere, is very much precarious. So what we miss in our society is care. People usually talk about the energy infrastructure, but and people say without this infrastructure we can't live. We can't live with the energy slaves. But nobody looks at our economic system and challenges the system, because we have a private sphere, a care sphere that supports the productive system. If you look at domestic work to GDP in salary increases, it would be the equivalent of the minimum wage. 30% of the economic activity is based on this system. This is huge. This is why, to my knowledge, if we have to rethink our economy, if we want to absorb the ecological and social shocks that we're living through, because yes, we live in a civilization which is mainly economic, like it's never been before. So economy should bring solutions, and the solution is care or caring. It's a way for us to rethink global economy as a whole. With care, we'll be able to rethink economic indicators. We'll be able to look at our economic growth in a different way. We'll consider other flows, the health flows, the ecological flows, the well-being flows, not just wealth flows or capital flows, which, unfortunately, as we've seen recently, is no guarantee of a prosperous world and healthy economies. With care, we'll be able to look at the notion of time differently, because what we need in care is time. And the reason why today people do not cared for enough, that we've lost the social link, is that we have no time. The nurses are complaining, the GPs are complaining, the staff in hospitals are complaining, so we have to rethink how we relate to time at political level, in companies, in society as a whole. With care, we'll be able to rethink our governance systems. We don't want to govern on the backs of those who try and escape the ecological problems. This is a nice image. Do you, Franklin, think that, for instance, La Défense in Paris, which is the business center of Paris, would be afraid of these new ecological policies without the crisis, because we have top leaders who think that they can avoid these social problems, these labor-related problems. That's why care is inclusive. It includes the people concerned by these challenges. It's a governance that's based on a democracy that functions. A care economy is something that's based on democracy, not an economy that's afraid of policymakers, which was the case for liberal economy in the past, which is the economic project today in the hands of the far right, which say about themselves that they're here for the people, but not at all. This economy is here to serve a very small percentage of decision makers. So the care economy shouldn't distrust economy or policy. The care economy should feel that they belong to the political world per se. And that's one of the major issues today. That is, the economic world has developed a very strange thing by remaining neutral. They don't want to face the fundamental role. They have a civil role to play in society. And what I've seen, which I would say is the main obstacle in the light of this care economy that's emerging, is that the starting point for the care economy is to recognize that we are personally vulnerable and vulnerable as a group. And that means we have to change mindsets. And this is something huge. And the liberal model is based on a philosophy that says we don't need God, we don't need masters, we don't need mothers. So if we want to rethink society together, if we want to draw up this narrative, this joint narrative, we have to realize that all of us are vulnerable and interdependent. What frightens me to some extent today is that the nationalist parties refuse these vulnerabilities. This is what it's all about. That is, we're trying to say, we'll avoid vulnerability. Whereas if we were to focus on collective vulnerabilities, we could find solutions. If collectively we're vulnerable, which is what we saw during COVID or geopolitical crisis, that's when we can try and rebuild and look at the loopholes in our societies. But the decision makers do the contrary. They try and avoid the problem. They say, we'll stop migration flows. They say, we're going to focus wealth here or there. And we're overpowerful. We're very mighty. We can beat the others. Whereas we should focus on vulnerabilities, to build our new societies. And of course, I want also to share hope with you. There's a plea that I have for the economic world. Today, the economic world, for me, has three choices ahead. That is, given the democratic crises, not just in France, but elsewhere, that's good news in the UK recently. So a democratic crisis, not just in France. And what are we seeing? We are seeing this crisis in the Western Bloc. The first thing is that the economic world could do what some have done already. They could play an active role and contribute to the development of extreme right ideas by financing extreme right groups, asking for deregulation, advantageous tax standards. And I was thinking about these dark moments of history. It's the same that's repeated. The second option, which is the economic world, could remain neutral and continue with the laissez-faire, which is one of the pillars of liberal economy. Let's wait and see what's going to happen. And then the economic world will adapt and will navigate all of the political difficulties. Or the economic world could muster courage. We know that in the past 50 years, the political world has gone down. The private sector has the money, and they can define society for tomorrow. So this is a plea for the players, the stakeholders in the economic world. You have to have courage to fight back. Whatever happens in our democracies, you should be the stakeholder who's going to finance independent media, the stakeholder who's going to finance care, the stakeholder, the player that's going to believe in transformation and the common narrative. Otherwise, we can't hope more from society. Thank you very much. I'm done.
Bien, merci. Merci beaucoup, Eva.
Thank you. Well, you've expressed your opinion, and of course that would restart the discussion, but it was fascinating. Anyway, we'll close now with, again, an exceptional individual. I've known her for a couple of years. Louise MUSHIKIWABO. She was Minister of Foreign Affairs for Rwanda, and today she's Secretary General of Francophonie, and the International Organization of Francophonie, that is the French-speaking area. And I suggested the word cooperation. you know, step by step, we have to push back the walls and remove all the constraints, everything that's negative, and try to regain ground for optimism and to control our own destiny and fate. That's a great quote, says he. Thank you. Jean-Hervé. Well, we're nearing the end of 2 days of solid reflections and pondering. Well, I have three proposals for a joint future and narrative and cooperation. First proposal is what I said yesterday in the during the North-South panel, North-South Equilibrium panel, and I was happy to hear Professor Jason talk about Professor Jason to say that when he said that we need to listen. Yes, we need to listen, and that's a key point. You explained that, but I think I would rather tell you a story. In February 2022, leaders from the African continent and European leaders met in Brussels. And they decided during a summit which was quite exceptional to review relationship between Europe and Africa and to organize a solid partnership where there would be dialogue, we would listen, support, mutual support, solidarity, and a lot of great things together. 10 days later, the Russia-Ukraine war broke out. Well, there was a resolution in the United Nations, and half of the African continent did not support Europe. So the question then that arose, and I heard it several times, we were in Brussels 10 days ago, how come so many African countries did not support our position for this war? And my answer was that, well, I'm running an organization which groups the Western countries and African countries and Asian countries as well. And I said to my European friends, first, because a lot of Africans do not understand this war. Some African countries have historic relationship with Russia, and therefore they do not dare take a stand and talk about aggression. Other countries have, national issues, jobs, and youth says to the African leaders, well, this is the white people war, take care of us. In March, organized a meeting of the ministers of foreign affairs of the French-speaking zone, and countries which supported, strongly supported Ukraine, including France, Canada, Romania, asked me to take the floor right at the beginning of the crisis to make a statement. You represent 88 states and governments. You should take the stand, express your support to Ukraine. But countries which are more remote or distant from the war and the situation, including many African countries, threatened me by saying, Madam, if you support Ukraine, we'll leave the organization, because 80% of the wheat that comes to our country comes from Russia. And other countries said, well, we are ready to denounce the aggression, but not condemnation. So the day we organized this ministerial meeting, we started at 9 o'clock in the morning. We did not close the meeting. When we finished the meeting at 7:30 p.m., it was quite remarkable. I learned a lot that day because I understood that we don't understand one another. It's not that we don't support a cause or we don't advocate for it, but we're not able to listen. We don't know how to listen. And I have a little anecdote, which is that very day we spent about 3 hours. We spent 3 hours of our time trying to find an alternative to the word condemnation, because most countries said, okay, we're against the Russian aggression, but please do not say condemned, because we don't know where this war is heading, and we don't know how this war is going to impact us. So French language being rich, after several hours, we replaced the word condemnation by, I remember, disapprove. Some countries said disapprove is too shy, it's not enough. So finally, we issued a resolution supporting Ukraine with the word strong reprobation. Strong reprobation. French language is beautiful. Anyway, they were all happy, but in fact, one day where we did not understand one another, but we do not listen enough. Second proposal is global governance, which has to be shared. For cooperation, you need means that you give room to everybody. Global governance was discussed yesterday. The behaviors of some countries. Mr. Barnier and President Macky Sall yesterday talked about the West, which thinks that in the West they think they know everything, and they're lecturing the others, and that's a major issue that always comes, is always raised in our discussion. Global governance today should take place, should change. Because otherwise there will be fractures. Global governance is a common good. United Nations were created for countries to get together following 2 world wars. That was a long time ago, and we need now, today, we need a reshuffling and updating of global governance. Third proposal, and here I'm referring to Africa for obvious reasons, youth. Collectively, we need to give hope to the young people. And in Africa, it is of lack of opportunity, lack of jobs, but they don't know what the future will be. And let me take the example of our member countries in the Sahel region, Sub-Sahara. In 4 years, there had been 7 coups in West Africa mainly, where a region where there is a security crisis for at least 2 decades, and where statistics in the field of education are scary, and I have to say they're appalling. And I'm an African, so I don't have any complex here. There is a very poor governance for many leaders in our country, and therefore the young people consider that any young army officer who comes with saying that I will change your lives, well, they support him, they go for it, and they say, but the governance from the civilian governments, they didn't change our lives. They were corrupted, So why are you worried about the arrival of young army officers? So youth needs to see that there is a hope for tomorrow, not just in Africa, by the way. I've observed the young people in Europe. I've been in Europe for the last 5.5 years during the COVID period, which they were totally lost. They didn't know what to do during the COVID period. They didn't know how long the crisis was going to last. They had to stay home for for months and not knowing what was going to, what would happen for their studies, friends, and let's give hope to the youth, help them. This is a must for all. Thank you. Dear friends, so you've decided to have dinner around 8:30, so or 9 o'clock, possibly later. So we've got such a great panel. Let's take a couple of questions about this vision you shared with us, the four of you, positive. Who has a question to one of the speakers? Any? With a microphone, please. We need a microphone. Good evening. I'm Amandine Dellen. I run a business called Marseille. My question is to Eva. You talked about vulnerability. Your speeches. I wondered if the starting point, I read that in the filigree, is the vulnerability of the manager, the business manager himself. And possibly, indeed, if we were to feminize the highest functions, vulnerability will come easier in businesses. Eva answers in 1 minute. Well, business managers today are not being hired for being vulnerable, but I think that's the issue. But men have to deal with this myth of virility, and the vulnerability is deep, and this is why sometimes it turns into something else than just collectivity. So you got me, I suppose, says Madame, by the way. I think society has to be more diverse, to have these new role models, which maybe will embody a mode of management which will gain the trust of everybody, and there will be vulnerability, will be appreciated, so that it enables, it makes it possible to better understand problems, and maybe those non-educated men managers will, this has to go through the educative systems, and they will have a better behavior. Another question, comment, remark. What's happening? Everybody's out. Hello? It was so great that you're all flabbergasted and you don't want to know anymore. So now I would like to thank the four members of the panel. You gave us a new vision, a very interesting vision, and very positive for at the end of the 2 days of work. Great thanks to the four of you. And now, I will now invite the president of the Cercle des Économistes to join us. Ladies and gentlemen, stay on stage. You can help us solve a political problem, Peter, possibly here. Thank you for this great session. We talked a lot about populism, values, but I want to read, I'm only the speaker of the Cercle des Économistes. I want to read a brief note. Just before major election for the future of our country, we, members of the Cercle des Économistes, call all participants to the Rencontres d'Aix who have shown their attachment to honest, clear, and inclusive dialogue, to oppose and to ensure that they will fight and advocate for the position of France in Europe and all our values, for tolerance, humanism, and this, our nations was built on that, and it would be a shame and a mistake to shift away from that.
On va terminer très rapidement.
Well, we'll finish. It won't be long. What you have now, what you've received, is a document which I think will cover what we've been working on. I'm not going to read through all these bullet points. I don't think there would be much value added in doing that. But maybe, by the way, could somebody bring me another paper? I should thank many people, so I need to have a list of people. I wouldn't mind saying thank you all, but well, what you have in front of you is an interesting document in three ways. As I mentioned before, we consider that the vote that took place several weeks ago, which perhaps will be confirmed in a way or another tomorrow, is a sign which really shows that there's malaise in our country. People feel uncomfortable and are going through difficulties. And rather than saying they're not doing this right or they're like this or like that, no, our duty at the Rencontres Économiques DEX is to try and shed light on things and understand the reasons for that. And as I said earlier on, what we think is that maybe the deep cause of this is a number of topics that have not yet been solved, a number of issues. And what Peter Handelson said about the situation in the UK really shed light on how we have to move on and continue in the weeks to come and the months to come. Not next week. Let's not talk about next week, shall we? That's my first remark. Second remark. All of these sessions, I think we had 72 or 73 sessions. Well, during all of these sessions, what we said is that we have to brainstorm on the basis of these themes, or on the basis of these difficulties. And this is what's important. And this is a message that we'll send to whom it may concern. That is, those who are going to govern the country, and more generally, those who are worried about the political situation in our country. That is, what we see is an absolute convergence, contrarily to what's happened before when we were drafting proposals that had been drawn up beforehand, to tell you the truth. Well, anyway, not drawn beforehand, but very quickly. What you have in front of you, ladies and gentlemen, is what all participants have converged to during these Rencontres DEX. My third point, and this will naturally lead me to explain that what we have done, by we I mean a team of 4, and I'll ask them to join us on the rostrum, Fabienne, Vincent, and Mathilde, and Camille. Could you please join us on stage? What you did was incredible, and you did that in 3 weeks. Could you please join us? Well, what about Camille? Where is Camille? Well, she's on her way, probably nibbling something. It's normal. So, as I was saying, what they have done collectively is that they've put across the simple idea, which is we're going to collect everybody's views. So you will get minutes for these 75 sessions that everybody's attended in a way or another, and you will see that there's genuine convergence. Oh yes, this is the list of thank yous. Right, now that was my second point. Thirdly, enshrined in this very idea, and that was very clear in what you said, both of you, is that there's, of course, the very short term. You will see on Monday there will be changes in interest rates, etc. People will be very fidgety. And then there's substance, the substance of things. And then we have to have a strong will, but we have to think in a very serious and deep way. So the 7 themes that you have in front of you are themes we've been brainstorming on. Oh my, oh my. Thank you very much. As I was saying, these are themes, 7 themes. I'm not going to read them out, but all of those themes are essential, which means that they're essential for French society. And I think this is what we can find in other Western societies. If we don't find solutions to these main challenges, the 7 challenges, our society, and I mean French society, will be facing the same difficulties in the months ahead. Well, we've had lots of signs, the yellow vests, the youth in the streets, etc. So we thought it was weird, strange, bizarre, but there was a word, I remember the word that Louise uttered. She said, listen, or listening. All the people we've been listening to are people who've all said, we have to listen to the French, lots of French, because many of them were not listened to. We have to listen to the North-South partners. When we discuss with our friendly African countries, and there are quite a few of those, we don't listen to them enough. It is not mutual listening. So the 7 themes are the themes you can see. They're major theme. Some of these proposals are quite bold, and there's a couple of those that are dear to me, so I must. Yes, I have to mention them. The first one is that when I was young, Peter, that's not long ago, is it, when I was young? When I was young, not long ago. 10% of the population were poor. 10%, well, there's a definition for that, a strict definition that defines the poverty line. Nowadays, we have 20%. We spend 33% of GDP for the equivalent of social cover or welfare, and 20% of our population who can't eat or drink, except if they go to low-cost restaurants where the food that's served is for the people out in the street. So the idea is that we thought about a 5th line in French social security for people who rely on caregivers, but we need another one on poverty, to fix poverty in very rich countries. We can't accept this. 1 person out of 5, that's 20% below the poverty line. And number 2, after COVID, we saw that sociologists were saying, oh, the French, they don't want to work. They don't want to work. They're lazy, lazy, lazy. They're lazy. I suppose the interpreters are translating this. They're lazy. So people are thinking about themselves, and you know what we could translate. Some would use ruder words, but the interpreters wouldn't use ruder words. Anyway, what's typical on the labor market is that when you start a low-skilled job and you're not paid well, the problem is a low wage that you get in France. In France, contrarily to what we had in the past, we're not changing anything. So what people only think about, for those who are poorly skilled jobs, not paid well, that nobody thinks about, is to go and retire as quickly as they can. And then people, they're the silly, lazy bunch, but no, they need care, support, and some type of outlook. I think it's 2 out of these 7 proposals. These 2 are excellent. I don't think that anything's going to be done in the weeks to come, but who knows? Who knows? And by the way, now I must say that what was done by these 4 people is incredible. Now, I'd like to thank people. That's the nicest moment, I think. Let me see. I'd like to thank everybody to start with. Okay, that's done. And in saying that I thank everybody, I'm not going to forget anybody. Now, let me see. I'm not going to read out all the names, otherwise it's going to get on your nerves. But I'd like to thank Françoise, our president, and all the members of the Cercle des Économistes. I'd like to thank Marie Castin, our president, and she gave these rencontres the right impetus. And now, Sophie Joassin, Renaud Muselier would like to thank you. That's for the political dimension. And, well, you know, we have an organization which is very serious. We have a supervisory board, and it's an honor for me to chair the supervisory board. So, and everybody's satisfied, I think. And then the members are Marion, Hélène, Laure. We'd like to thank them as well on the supervisory board. As we usually say, our friend, Mr. Macron, our president, has dissolved, well, on Sunday at 9 p.m. He dissolved the National Assembly. He was dressed in black, etc. And then, in the hours that followed, we decided to recast our program. Well, of course, the four of you would be our keynote speakers, but not at the same time. We had to get rid of Sunday, so it's thanks to this supervisory board. Thank you. Thank you. And then who's next? I'll speed up. We'd like to thank Nicole, who's our local relay, the local hands, Camille, who played an essential role recently, and also, well, the first names, well, we have the names. And whom should I think? The Région Sud, the Town Hall, the MU, all the police forces, those in charge of security and safety. You didn't know, but there was a threat hovering on your heads, but you were protected and sheltered here. And in Marion's team, let me go through these names. I'm so happy. The program team: Clément, Pauline, Marie-Lou, Mathis, Roxane, Hussein, Audrey, Willy. They're really incredible, amazing people. In Marion's team for communication, Alban, Anne, Éloi, Pauline, Célia. Something important for us as well. Now, you remember you were in charge of Obama's campaign, the political campaign, the president, Obama. And we were very impressed because you used the internet and all these tools. This was great. Well, we did the same as well. We did the same. That's 5 years ago. 5 years ago, we had 10,000 people following us. And this evening, let me give you the number, 1 million followers. 1 million. And I have real-time results. 999,000 thought you were great. Now the timekeepers: Vincent, Lena, Ryan, Abdelhamid, Etienne, Arnaud, and Emma. Laure, I mentioned before. But Laure was hovering. I suppose you've not seen this, but this truly is a village. Pauline, Anaïs, Myriam, Camille, Cédric, and Fred, Anton, Nélan. Laure. By the way, there's a strange expression, support team, in French, renfort. Probably means something. Does that mean that we were too weak? Well, anyway, thank you for those who supported us. Oleksandra, Eddie, Catherine. Hélène, partner de Kilsia, Thomas, Remy. Hélène, Jeunesse, Camille, Eléa, and Léa. There we are, Laurence, Emma, and Adrian. And in the final declaration, final declaration, well, there was no final declaration, because otherwise Pierre-Jacques is going to give me a good wigging, but at least we have the final report which includes the declaration. It's a statement. And we had note keepers in addition to Mathilde, Vincent, Lucien, Augustin. We had Kevin, Unal, Clémentine, Lola. And something like 100 white shirts, the ones who are guiding you through the park. I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to say you're incredible. I know it's simple to say, but I really mean it for once. For once, I mean it. And what I suggest is that we have our dinner, and then we go to the concert. You will see this is going to be amazing. I think it's going to be here. Thank you very much, Jean-Hervé. Thank you for what you've done. Jean-Hervé, everything was finely oiled for these rencontres économiques. Thank you. Bravo.